Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. When a violent storm batters the coast of Maine in 1999, it uncovers a buried skeleton near the cliffs of Gray Point Island, home to an abandoned lighthouse long believed to be cursed. Rookie detective Erin Calloway is dispatched to investigate, eager to prove herself. But the deeper she digs into the island's history, the more she realizes the bones may belong to one of 7 missing people who vanished in the 1970s, all connected to the reclusive lighthouse keeper, Walter Dray, who disappeared without a trace. Now, as the sea claws at the rocks and night closes in, Erin begins to hear strange sounds from the lighthouse tower and discovers evidence suggesting someone never left the island. The storm came without warning. Gray Point Island, 2 miles off the ragged coast of Maine, had weathered its share of tempests, but nothing like this. The sky split open in sheets of lightning, the sea roared like something alive, and the cliffs bled rainwater into the black waves below. By the time the Coast Guard reached the island the next morning, half of the eastern bluff had collapsed into the ocean. The old lighthouse, silent for nearly 2 decades, still stood, a crooked silhouette against the fog. But something had changed. The storm had unearthed something. Something buried beneath the cliff's edge. Detective Erin Calloway was new to the department, barely 6 months out of academy, and already trying to prove she wasn't just another rookie from inland who couldn't handle the coast. When her phone buzzed that morning, she hadn't even had her coffee. "Calloway," she mumbled. "Get your gear," her sergeant said. "We've got a situation out at Gray Point. Coast Guard found remains. Human. Looks that way. You're catching this one." Her stomach tightened. "Alone. You wanted real field work. Consider this your initiation." He hung up before she could argue. Gray Point Island was only reachable by ferry, but with the docks half destroyed, the Coast Guard shuttled her in by inflatable boat. The ride was brutal, sheets of spray and wind stinging her face, but when the lighthouse came into view, something in Erin's chest went still. The structure loomed at the island's edge, white paint peeled away by decades of storms, its lantern room shattered. It had been decommissioned in 1978 after the last keeper vanished. The legend said he'd gone mad. As the boat scraped ashore, a Coast Guard officer waved her over. "Detective Calloway?" he asked, helping her out. "I'm Chief Hollis. We found the bones just past the bluff. Looks like the storm did our digging for us." They hiked up a slick path through wild grass and thorn bushes until the cliffs opened wide before them. The wind here carried the salt of the sea and the faint metallic tang of exposed earth. At the edge of the cliff, half buried in mud and rock, was a pale curve of bone. A skull, weathered but unmistakably human. Erin crouched, gloved hands steady despite the wind. "You didn't move anything?" Hollis shook his head. "Not a thing. But we did find this nearby." He held out a rusted object, small, circular, and almost swallowed by corrosion. Erin brushed off the mud. It was a locket. Inside, behind the cracked glass, was a faded photograph of a young woman smiling in the sunlight. "Whoever she was," Hollis murmured, "she didn't deserve to end up here." Erin slipped the locket into an evidence bag. "We'll find out who she was." She said it with conviction, but her eyes drifted toward the lighthouse. Something about it felt wrong. The base of the tower was surrounded by a small cluster of abandoned buildings, what had once been the keeper's quarters, storage sheds, and a tiny boathouse. Erin ducked inside the main cottage first. Dust and decay filled the air. A rusted kettle sat on the stove, the handle crusted in green. The walls were lined with shelves of nautical charts, weather logs, and brittle newspapers. One headline caught her eye. "7th Disappearance at Sea near Gray Point, 1975. Below the headline, a black and white photo showed the missing, young men and women from nearby coastal towns, all presumed lost in rough waters. The last name listed was Amelia Dray. "Dray," Erin murmured. She knew that name. The old keeper was Walter Dray, the man who'd vanished in '78. Could Amelia have been his daughter? Before she could read further, a voice startled her. "Don't touch that." Erin spun around. An elderly man stood in the doorway, rain slicker dripping, eyes hard. "I'm Detective Calloway," she said, straightening. "And you are?" "Name's Silas Venn. I was the ferry captain back when people still came here. Haven't seen anyone step foot on Grey Point in 20 years. Erin gestured toward the newspaper. "You knew Walter Dre?" Silas's jaw tightened. "Knew him. Didn't like him. Nobody did. The man lived up here alone after his girl went missing. Kept the light burning even after they decommissioned it. Said the sea was still hungry." "The sea?" He nodded slowly. "Every year, another person gone. Fishermen, travelers. Bodies never found. He said the water took what it was owed." Erin frowned. "You think Dre had something to do with those disappearances?" Silas's gaze drifted to the lighthouse. "All I know is when he vanished, the island went quiet. Until now." A chill worked its way up her spine. By the time Erin returned to the excavation site, forensics had arrived by boat. They were already working the soil, sifting carefully through the eroded cliffside. "Preliminary guess?" she asked one of the techs. "Female, mid-20s, he said. "Been down there a long time. Maybe 25 years or more. We'll know more once we get her back to the lab." Erin glanced toward the ocean, where the tide crashed violently below. 25 years, she murmured. "That's 1974. The same year Amelia Dre disappeared." As daylight faded, Erin walked alone to the lighthouse. The heavy iron door creaked open with protest, revealing a spiral staircase winding into shadow. She shined her flashlight upward, catching glimpses of rusted railings and damp stone. Halfway up, she stopped. Something had been carved into the wall. Words, deep, deliberate gouges in the plaster. "Keep the light. Don't let her in." Her breath caught. At the top, the lantern room was shattered, glass littering the floor like ice. The ocean spread endlessly beyond, swallowing the horizon. But as she turned to leave, her light swept across the wall and froze. There was something painted there, beneath decades of dust. A mural. A woman's face, pale and serene, with eyes the color of the sea. And beneath it, the same words repeated in dripping, black paint. "Don't let her in." Erin's pulse thudded in her ears. The air felt heavier here, the silence almost sentient. Then, faint, but distinct, she heard a sound below. A creak. A footstep. "Hello," she called, voice echoing down the stairwell. No reply. Only the whisper of the wind through broken glass. She descended slowly, beams sweeping the dark. Each step moaned beneath her weight. When she reached the ground floor, the door was open, though she was certain she'd closed it. Outside, the fog had thickened into a wall of white. The sea was just a sound now, distant and relentless. Something moved in the mist. A flicker of motion, just beyond her light. "Coast Guard," she tried. No answer. She edged forward until her flashlight caught a figure at the edge of the cliff, tall, unmoving. It stood facing the sea. "Sir, this is a restricted area," she called. The figure didn't move. It took another step, and the light flickered. When it came back on, the figure was gone. Only the empty edge of the cliff remained. Erin returned to the mainland long after midnight, soaked and exhausted. In her motel room, she spread out the day's findings on the bed. Photos of the remains, the rusted locket, the old newspaper. As she reached for her notebook, something slid from between the pages of the newspaper, an old photograph she hadn't noticed before. It showed Walter Dre standing beside the lighthouse, arm wrapped protectively around a young woman. Her face was unmistakable. The same woman from the locket. On the back, written in fading ink. "Me and Amelia, Grey Point, 1973. Before the voices started. That night, Erin dreamed of the sea. Of standing on the cliffs beneath a full moon. Of hearing someone whisper through the wind. A woman's voice, soft and pleading. "Turn on the light." When she awoke, the sound of waves still echoed in her ears. And on the motel desk, her phone buzzed with a new voicemail. The timestamp read, 2:13 a.m. She pressed play. A faint hiss of static filled the line. Then a voice, distorted but clear. "Detective Calloway, don't come back to the island. She's awake." The call ended. The number was untraceable. Erin Calloway didn't believe in curses. Not until that morning. She replayed the voicemail 3 times while driving toward the sheriff's office, the hiss of static and that distorted voice echoing through the car. Whoever it was had known her name, and they'd known she'd been on Gray Point Island. By the time she arrived at the office in Port Harrison, her nerves felt like frayed wires. The air smelled of coffee and wet wool, a dozen phones ringing off the hook as reports from the storm still poured in. Sergeant Dempsey leaned against his desk when she entered, arms crossed. "You look like hell, Calloway." "I've been on a cursed island," she replied flatly. He blinked. "Noted. What have you got?" She slid a folder onto his desk, photos of the remains, the locket, and the newspaper clipping. "Female victim, mid-20s. Found near the lighthouse. There's a chance it's Amelia Dre, the daughter of the last keeper." Dempsey raised an eyebrow. "Dre? That the one who went missing back in the 70s? "Yeah. I found a photo of her with her father, Walter Dre. The same woman's in the locket buried with the body." Dempsey flipped through the photos, frowning. "So you think he killed his own kid?" "I don't know yet. But if he did, he didn't stop there. There were at least 6 other disappearances connected to that island between 72 and 76. Dempsey let out a low whistle. "Hell of a story. You planning to head back?" "I have to. There's something in that lighthouse. Records? Maybe from Dre's time as keeper." And she hesitated. "I got a call last night. No number. The voice said not to go back." That got his attention. "You think someone's out there?" "I think someone doesn't want me finding out what happened." By noon, Erin was back on the water. The sea had calmed, but the fog was still thick, hugging the horizon like smoke. The Coast Guard refused to make another run, citing structural instability, so she hired a local fisherman named Owen Pike. Owen was in his late 50s, face carved by salt and sun. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice rasped like gravel. "You're heading to Gray Point?" he asked, tossing a rope into the boat. "That's right." "Shouldn't," he muttered. "Place eats people. Always has." "You sound like the ferry captain I met yesterday," Erin said. "Silas Venn." Owen's hands paused. "Venn still talking about Gray Point, huh?" He spat into the water. "He saw things out there. Lost his brother in the 75 storm. Said Walter Dre called for help, but by the time anyone got there, his brother's boat was gone. Not a splinter left." "Did they ever find a body?" "Nope. Just his rain slicker, washed up with claw marks down the back." Erin frowned. "Claw marks?" Owen just started the motor. Best not to ask questions the sea don't want answered. Gray Point Island emerged from the fog like a ghost, its cliffs jagged, the lighthouse rising like a spine against the sky. The wind carried the cry of gulls and something else, something softer, like a hum. Erin stepped onto the rocky shore. The air here felt heavier than it should have, the silence deeper. Inside the keeper's cottage, she found what she'd come for. The logbooks. They were stacked neatly on a desk near the window, each bound in cracked leather and labeled by year. The topmost one read, 1974. She opened it carefully. The first pages were routine, weather notes, tide times, fuel inventories. But the handwriting began to change halfway through, shaky, uneven. July 3, 1974, fog thicker than ever. Heard her again by the cliffs. Singing this time. Thought it was Amelia, but she's been gone 2 days. I keep the light burning. Maybe it'll bring her home. Erin's pulse quickened as she flipped ahead. July 7th, she came to the door last night. Or something wearing her face did. The light keeps her out. I must not let it go dark. Her stomach turned. July 9th, the others came looking. They shouldn't have. The sea took them too. The light must stay lit. The light keeps them sleeping. Erin exhaled slowly. "Jesus, Walter." There were more entries, each one more fragmented, until the final page stopped mid-sentence. August 12th, the water speaks when the wind dies. The ink trailed off into a thick, black smear. She closed the book, her heartbeat echoing in the empty room. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Find anything worth freezing your bones for? Aaron jumped. Silas then stood in the doorway, pipe between his teeth, eyes narrow. I thought you didn't come out here anymore, she said. Didn't plan to. But when the fog gets this thick, I can't stay away. He walked in slowly, glancing at the open ledger. You read his notes. Every word. Silas's gaze darkened. Then you know he lost his mind. Maybe, Aaron said. Or maybe he was trying to tell someone what really happened. He chuckled bitterly. You think there's a difference? Aaron didn't answer. Instead, she asked, Why did you really come back, Silas? He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. It was old, edges curled from moisture. This was taken the week before Amelia vanished, he said. The photo showed a small group on the island, Walter Dre, his daughter, Silas himself, and two men Aaron didn't recognize. One of them wore a sheriff's badge. The other had the hard look of a man used to giving orders. Who's that? Aaron asked, pointing to the second man. Silas's jaw tightened. Harlan Quinn. He was sheriff back then. Paid Dre to keep the light burning, even after the government cut funding. Something about private shipments. I didn't ask questions. Smuggling? Silas nodded once. Dre was supposed to signal when the coast was clear. But the night Amelia vanished, the light stayed dark. After that, everything went to hell. Aaron felt her stomach knot. You think she found out what her father was doing? Maybe. Or maybe she found something worse. He turned toward the window, his reflection warped in the fog. You know what's buried out by those cliffs, detective? I saw one body. Maybe more. Silas's voice dropped to a whisper. There's 7. The storm rolled in fast that evening, wind howling through the broken glass. Aaron stayed behind after Silas left, determined to find proof of what he'd said. In the cellar beneath the cottage, she discovered crates stamped with faded government insignia, U.S. Naval Supply, 1974. They were empty, save for a few broken tools and ropes. But behind one stack of crates, she found a door. It wasn't on any blueprint she'd seen. A narrow wooden door with a chain lock, half rotted from salt. She unlatched it and pushed it open. The smell hit first, earth, damp and old. The passage beyond sloped downward, carved from rock. She followed it with her flashlight, the beam trembling over walls slick with moisture. After 20 feet, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. At the center stood a rusted lantern, and beside it, an old, leather-bound book. She knelt and brushed away the dust. It wasn't a lighthouse log. It was something else. The cover read simply, Amelia's Journal. Aaron's throat tightened as she opened it. June 28, 1974. Father says the sea is alive. I think he's right. I saw it breathe today. There was a shape beneath the water, long, pale, like a hand. July 1st, he says to stay away from the cliffs. Says the light keeps her way. But I hear her singing sometimes. I think she's beautiful. July 4th, the men came again. They argued with Father. One of them hit him. After they left, he told me to hide. Said they were bringing something to the island tonight. The next entry was smeared, almost unreadable. July 5th, it wasn't cargo. It was a person. A woman. She's still alive. Father said it's necessary. Said the sea would forgive us if we gave her what it wants. Aaron froze. The air around her seemed to thicken. July 6th, the woman begged. Father told me to cover my ears. I didn't. I heard her scream until the water went still. Now Father won't stop talking to the ocean. The final page had only 2 words, scrawled in jagged ink. She's coming. Aaron slammed the book shut, breath shaking. Then she heard it, the sound of footsteps above her, slow and deliberate, pacing across the floorboards of the cottage. Silas, she called. No answer. The steps stopped directly above her. And then a voice drifted down through the floorboards, faint but unmistakable. Turn on the light. Aaron's flashlight flickered, plunging her into darkness. When it came back, the footsteps were gone. But the door she'd entered through was now closed. And from somewhere beyond it came the soft, steady creak. of someone winding the lighthouse's old rotating beacon. Erin Calloway wasn't sure what woke her first, the sound of the wind or the whisper of the waves against the rocks. When she came to, her flashlight had died, and the only light came from above, a thin sliver bleeding through the cracks in the cellar door. Her watch read 3:11 a.m. The storm had passed, but the island felt even more silent than before. The sound that had startled her awake came again, a rhythmic grinding from the direction of the lighthouse. The beacon, dead for decades, was turning. Erin's throat went dry. "Impossible," she whispered. She shoved the cellar door open and stepped into the cottage. The room was empty. No footprints. No sound of retreating steps. But outside, the beam of the lighthouse swung in slow, steady arcs across the Black Sea, alive, like an eye opening after a long sleep. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to get back on the boat and never look back. But something deeper, something stubborn and familiar, kept her rooted to the spot. If that light was burning again, it meant someone had restarted the generator. And the only generator on the island was buried in the lighthouse's base. She moved carefully through the mist, her boots crunching on the gravel path. The fog clung to her clothes like wet gauze, and each gust of wind seemed to carry a faint murmur, like a voice calling her name, then dissolving into static. When she reached the lighthouse, the door was ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of diesel and salt. The metal stairs spiraled up into the dark, the rotating lens above creaking with every turn. The generator in the corner sputtered and hummed. Erin crouched beside it. The control panel had been cleaned recently, fresh fingerprints smudged the metal. Someone had definitely been here. And then she saw something on the floorboards, a footprint in the thin layer of dust. But, well, she aimed her flashlight upward. "Hello? Anyone there?" The sound that answered was faint but deliberate. A single knock against metal, coming from the top of the tower. Erin climbed. Each step echoed, the air growing colder the higher she went. The light above turned slowly, its beams slicing through fog and shadow. When she reached the top, she stopped cold. The lens room was empty. The beacon turned by itself, gears whining softly. But on the glass, someone had written words with a trembling hand. "She's not gone." And beneath those words, drawn in the condensation, was the crude outline of a woman, hair flowing downward, as if she were sinking. Erin backed away, every muscle tensed. Her phone buzzed suddenly, nearly making her drop it. One unread message. No number. Just a timestamp, 3:23 a.m. She opened it. Don't listen to her. The message vanished before she could screenshot it. She exhaled sharply, trying to steady her breathing. There was only one explanation. Someone else was still on this island watching her. She hurried back down the stairs, but the air shifted as she reached the bottom. The generator had stopped. The beacon's light faded, plunging everything into blackness again. Then came the voice, soft, lilting, carried on the wind through the broken door. "You shouldn't have come back." Erin froze. It wasn't Silas. The voice was female, faintly distorted, as if echoing from beneath water. "He tried to keep me quiet." "Who's there?" Erin demanded. "He buried me where the tide turns. But I still see the light." The air pressure dropped. The door slammed shut, sealing her in. Erin ran for the side exit, wrenching it open against the wind. Outside, the fog churned violently, moving in unnatural spirals. For a moment, it almost looked like a figure, long hair streaming, arms reaching. And then it was gone. By dawn, Erin was back at the docks. The fog had thinned enough for Owen's boat to make a cautious approach. When he saw her waiting, soaked to the bone and pale, he frowned. "What the hell happened out there?" "The light came back on," she said. "Someone, or something, turned it." Owen's hand tightened on the wheel. "Then you woke her." Erin stared. "Who?" "The woman beneath the waves." She wanted to laugh it off, but Owen's tone stopped her. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "My grandmother used to talk about her. Said there was something buried under the lighthouse long before the first keeper arrived. A woman they drowned for witchcraft. Every few decades she takes someone, calls to them through the fog until they walk into the sea." That's just folklore. He met her gaze. You sure? Because a dozen men from this coast vanished near Grey Point before I was even born. And every time, the light was burning when it shouldn't have been. Erin didn't answer. She pulled Amelia's journal from her bag and opened to the final page. She's coming. The ink seemed darker than before, still wet, somehow. Later that afternoon, Erin returned to the Port Harrison Library, hoping to find old maritime records. The head archivist, an older woman named Ruth Kavanaugh, was waiting for her. I heard you were asking about the Dre family, Ruth said quietly. You'd better come with me. She led Erin into the back room, where dust-covered boxes lined the shelves. She pulled one marked Grey Point Lighthouse, 1974 investigation. Inside were water-damaged reports, photos, and an incident log. Ruth laid out a photograph, black and white, grainy. It showed the base of the lighthouse after the '74 storm. In the foreground was a tarp-covered body, and standing behind it, Walter Dre, looking hollow-eyed and soaked. The official story was an accident, Ruth said. They said his daughter drowned trying to save a wrecked ship's passenger. But look closer. Erin squinted. Under the tarp, a pale hand was visible, thin, delicate, with a ring still on one finger. But it wasn't Amelia's ring. It matched the one in the locket. There were two bodies, Ruth whispered. Only one was buried. The other disappeared before the autopsy. Erin leaned back, her pulse pounding. You're saying Dre killed two women? I'm saying the island keeps its dead. She reached into the box again and handed Erin a folded letter. The paper was brittle, written in looping script. To whoever takes my place, keep the light burning. Never let it die. It's the only thing keeping her from coming home. W.D. That night, Erin couldn't sleep. She sat in her motel room, journal open on the bed, studying the pattern of the storm map she'd drawn. The disappearances always occurred during high tides, all within a few days of the solstice. Tomorrow was June 21st, the summer solstice. And she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her on that island. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. You want the truth? Go to the cliffs at low tide. She'll show you. Erin stared at the screen. Her rational mind screamed trap. But her gut, her stubborn, investigative instinct, knew she couldn't ignore it. The next afternoon, she returned to Grey Point. The tide had retreated, revealing slick rocks and tidapools that glimmered like eyes. The fog had lifted enough for her to see the base of the cliffs clearly. That's when she saw it. A piece of cloth fluttering between the rocks. She climbed down, careful not to slip. The fabric was old, part of a woman's dress, pale blue and shredded. Nearby, half buried in the sand, was a bracelet. Erin brushed away the grit and froze. It was engraved, A.D. Amelia Dre. She glanced toward the waterline and saw movement beneath the surface. At first, it looked like her own reflection. Then it wasn't. A woman's face stared up from beneath the waves, eyes open, hair drifting around her like seaweed. Her lips moved, forming words Erin couldn't hear, until she leaned closer. He lied. Erin stumbled backward, nearly falling. The figure's hand rose to the surface, fingertips breaking the water before dissolving into foam. Behind her, something shifted in the rock. A hidden entrance, half concealed by moss and driftwood. Erin stepped closer. Inside, the darkness smelled of salt and decay. She turned on her flashlight. A narrow tunnel led into the cliffside, lined with boards and rusted metal. Symbols were carved into the walls, circles, waves, and an eye surrounded by flame. And at the end of the passage lay a door. A heavy, iron door with a large wheel lock. Carved across it were 3 words. The woman waits. Erin reached out, her hand trembling. The metal was cold as ice. Then she heard the whisper again, this time behind her. He gave me to the sea. She turned. No one. But the water at the cave's mouth was rising, pulling inward as though something massive was moving beneath it. Erin took a step back, flashlight flickering. The iron door began to tremble. A hiss of escaping air. A single, pale hand pressed out from the seam. Erin bolted out of the cave, scrambling up the rocks as the tide surged violently behind her. She didn't stop until she reached the lighthouse path. The beam, once dead, burst to life again, sweeping across the ocean. And for a moment, just one, she saw her. A woman standing in the waves, eyes glowing faintly with reflected light. Watching her. Erin Calloway didn't remember running. Only the sound of her own heartbeat pounding against her ribs as she burst through the lighthouse doors. The beam above swung in endless circles, slicing through fog thick as cotton, and every rotation seemed to pull something closer from the sea. She slammed the door shut behind her and dropped to her knees, breath ragged. The air inside the tower was heavy, humid, like the inside of a lung. Each time she inhaled, the walls seemed to flex ever so slightly, as if the whole place were breathing. She pressed a hand against the metal wall. The vibration wasn't from the generator. It was deeper, rhythmic, organic. The lighthouse was alive. When she finally forced herself to stand, she found the air thick with condensation. Drops of water trickled down the staircase like sweat. She aimed her flashlight upward, and for a moment she thought she saw something crawling just beneath the metal, thin veins spreading through the structure like roots. Her rational brain screamed no. It had to be water damage. Nothing more. But then came the whisper from somewhere above. "You brought her back." The voice wasn't Amelia's this time. It was male. Older. Erin's grip tightened on her flashlight. "Walter Dre." Silence. But she remembers the promise. Her pulse spiked. What promise? The light flickered, and when it came back, the walls looked different. Smeared. Darker. Something red had seeped into the rivets along the stairwell. Blood, or what looked like it? Erin stumbled backward, the metallic tang hitting her nose. Her flashlight caught a shape at the top of the stairs, just for a second. A man, soaked from head to toe, staring down at her through hollow eyes. Then the light blinked out again. When it came back, she was alone. She bolted out into the fog, gasping for air. The beam from the lighthouse continued to turn, though the generator had long gone silent. The rotation was impossible, mechanically, physically impossible. Yet it kept moving, steady as breath. The storm had washed half the path away, but she followed it toward the keeper's cottage anyway. Her shoes squelched through the mud, her mind replaying the words over and over. She remembers the promise. Inside the cottage, everything was wrong. Furniture she'd seen overturned before now sat neatly in place. The dust was gone, the windows intact. A fire burned quietly in the hearth, casting a faint orange glow over the walls. Erin froze in the doorway. The place looked alive again, like it had decades ago. Then she saw movement at the table. A man sat there, back turned. His hair was gray and wet, and his hands trembled as he wrote in a logbook. "Mr. Dre," she whispered. He didn't look up. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Calloway." Her throat went dry. "You know who I am?" He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the hollow curve of his cheek, the eyes that seemed to glow faintly from within. "The light called you. It always does." "I found your journal," Erin said carefully. "I know what happened to Amelia." He smiled faintly. "Do you? You killed her." He set his pen down, the movement deliberate. "No. I kept her from the water. But the sea always collects its debts." Erin stepped forward. "Then who's the woman buried near the cliffs?" Dre's expression twisted. Anger, guilt, something darker. "The woman beneath the waves. They brought her to me. They said the sea wanted her. Said if I gave her, it would end. But the tide doesn't end, Miss Calloway. It only comes again." His voice cracked on the last word. He turned to face her fully, and the light from the fire revealed his skin. Waterlogged. The flesh around his neck had the waxy look of someone long drowned. Erin stumbled back. Dre rose slowly, his soaked boots leaving no prints on the wooden floor. "You've turned the light on. That means she's awake." "Who?" He leaned close. "Amelia." The room shuddered. The fire dimmed to blue. And just like that, he was gone. Erin blinked hard, her breath visible in the sudden cold. The fire was out, the room empty again, the air heavy with damp salt. For a long moment she stood motionless, trying to ground herself in logic. Hallucination. Exhaustion. Exposure. Anything but what her eyes had just seen. But logic failed when she turned toward the wall behind the hearth and noticed a crack she hadn't seen before, thin, but pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. She pressed her ear to it. From inside came a sound like rushing water and a whisper. Behind the fire. She moved fast, shoving aside the iron grate and scraping at the loose bricks. After several minutes, one stone came free, revealing a small recess behind the wall. Inside was another book, this one smaller, bound in dark leather that looked half melted from heat. When she opened it, her breath caught. The handwriting wasn't Walter's. It was Amelia's. July 8, 1974. Father says she wants me now. He says if I stay near the light, she'll let me live. But I don't think that's true. I think she's already inside the walls. July 10th. I saw her reflection in the mirror room again. The woman in the water. She looks like me now. July 12th. Father is talking to her through the light. He says she promised him something. He says she'll keep the sea calm if I go willingly. July 14th. I'm not afraid anymore. I think I'm already hers. The final entry was barely legible, written in jagged, frantic strokes. The house breathes when she's near. The light is her heart. If it stops, she wakes. Erin read the words 3 times before lowering the book. If it stops, she wakes. She looked toward the lighthouse, its beams still sweeping the dark. By the time she reached the tower again, the fog had grown thick enough to swallow sound. Every footstep echoed strangely, as if the island itself were hollow beneath her. Inside, the floor was slick with seawater that shouldn't have been there. It pooled around the generator, reflecting the rotating beam like liquid glass. Erin crouched beside it. The machine wasn't running, but the beacon still moved. Then, in the reflection on the floor, she saw movement. Not behind her. Beneath her. A shape pressed upward from under the surface of the water, fingers spreading like petals. A face followed, a woman's, pale and serene, hair floating like black ink. Erin stumbled back, flashlight shaking. The reflection smiled. He said you'd come. Her own voice. He promised me another daughter. Erin dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor, beams spinning wildly. The reflection fractured, then the water erupted upward, soaking her. She screamed and backed against the wall, heart pounding. The air smelled like iron and brine. The reflection was gone. The water was still. But above her, the light faltered for the first time. Twice. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. And from the cliffs outside came the distant, hollow sound of something breaking free. Erin ran. Out the door, through the fog, down toward the shore. The tide was rising fast, too fast. Waves crashed violently against the rocks, spraying foam high into the air. Then she saw it. A figure standing where the surf met the sand. Long hair. Torn dress. Bare feet. Amelia? Erin called. The figure turned, eyes luminous and empty. Her skin shimmered like scales beneath the moonlight. He promised me peace. Erin shook her head. You're not real. The woman took a step closer, her feet leaving no prints. He promised me the light. The air grew colder. Erin's breath came out in white clouds. The waves rose behind the figure, swirling in a slow, deliberate spiral. Now it's yours. The voice came from everywhere, from the sea, the air, the walls of the island itself. The wind howled, carrying whispers that sounded like her own name, multiplied 100-fold. Erin stumbled backward toward the cottage, but the ground beneath her feet trembled. The house groaned, wood bending, walls flexing in and out with each gust like lungs. It was breathing again. And this time, it was exhaling. Windows shattered. The door blew open. Air rushed out in a violent burst that knocked her to the ground. The smell of salt and decay filled her lungs. When she looked up, she saw the impossible. The cottage's roof sagged inward, and through it, she glimpsed the lighthouse's beam, now turned blood-red, rotating slower, like a heartbeat fading away. The woman on the shore smiled. Now you keep the light. Erin screamed as the wave hit. She awoke hours later on the beach, drenched, shivering. The sky was pale gray, dawn. The lighthouse stood silent. No light, no sound. Her phone was gone. So was the journal. But on the sand beside her lay something small and gleaming. A silver locket. Inside, instead of Amelia's photograph, there was now a picture of her, Erin Calloway. And on the back, engraved freshly into the metal, were 3 words. Keep the light. The storm that had battered Grey Point for days had finally passed, but the air hadn't cleared. The island still felt swollen with electricity, like a breath held too long, waiting to be released. The sea moaned against the cliffs below, waves scraping stone with the persistence of something that never tires. Detective Erin Calloway stood outside the lighthouse, the salt air stinging her face. She'd spent the morning combing through Walter Dray's ledgers again, every page revealing more about a man she couldn't quite understand. He was obsessive, yes. His handwriting tight, his sentences clipped. But beneath the rigidity, there was desperation. Fear maybe. On the last page of the ledger, she'd found something that chilled her. When the light turns red, I'll know they've come back. The lighthouse had never used a red beacon, according to the Coast Guard records. Yet the line was dated October 19, 1975, the night Dray disappeared. And that was why Erin stood here now, the tower looming over her like a century of old ghosts. The sun was beginning to set, and she'd made a decision she wasn't sure was wise. She was going to power the lighthouse again. Inside, the structure groaned in protest as she climbed the spiraling iron staircase. Dust motes shimmered in the beam of her flashlight. Every footstep echoed up the narrow core, the sound swallowed by the hollow center of the tower. Halfway up, she paused to look at the wall. Someone had carved tally marks into the stone. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. She counted 20 before stopping, the lines uneven, etched in different pressures, as if over time by different hands. Her breath fogged the air. The higher she climbed, the colder it got. By the time she reached the lamp room, the sky was awash in violet. The lantern mechanism sat like a forgotten god in the middle of the glass dome, its once shining brass corroded with green rust. Erin brushed dust from the control panel, revealing faint writing in black marker, only light when alone. Her pulse kicked up. What the hell were you doing up here, Walter? She pulled the lever. The motor coughed, then wheezed to life. The giant lens rotated with a creak that vibrated through the floor. At first, the beam flickered weakly, a pale yellow struggling through grime-caked glass. But then, as the mechanism warmed, something shifted. The beam changed color. Slowly, impossibly, it turned red. A deep, crimson glow swept across the ocean, bathing the island in a strange, blood-tinted light. Erin's skin prickled. Then, as if the island were responding to the signal, a low rumble echoed from somewhere below. Back at the guest house, Tom Harker was organizing his notes when the window flashed red. He looked up, startled, the light cutting across his face like a warning flare. What the hell? He ran outside, the wind catching his coat. The lighthouse burned red against the dusk, a scarlet heartbeat pulsing over the island. He grabbed his camera instinctively and zoomed in on the tower. Through the viewfinder, he caught movement. Someone standing inside the glass chamber. Erin. He was about to shout when he noticed something else in the shot. Down by the shoreline, where the old supply path led to the keeper's boathouse, another light flickered, brief and faint, like a lantern swinging in the dark. He lowered the camera. The hair on his arms rose. Inside the tower, Erin watched the beam revolve, its red light cutting across the horizon. The air around her vibrated faintly, like a tuning fork struck against glass. She tried to rationalize it, old wiring, interference, the storm. But when the noise deepened into something rhythmic, like breathing, her reason began to fracture. She turned off the motor. The light kept turning. Okay, she whispered, her throat tightening. That's not possible. Then came the sound of footsteps on the stairs below. Not the metallic groan of shifting iron, but deliberate, measured steps. Erin's flashlight swung toward the staircase. Tom? Is that you? No answer. The steps paused, then resumed, slower now, as if whoever was climbing wanted her to know they were there. She backed toward the wall, hand on her holster. "I'm armed." The light swept over the stairs in its rotation, and for a heartbeat she saw a figure, a shadowy outline moving just below her, ascending steadily. She pulled her gun. "Stop right there." But when the beam came around again, the staircase was empty. Down below, the door to the tower hung open, swaying in the wind. A faint red pulse spilled out onto the rocky ground. Tom reached it, panting, his flashlight shaking. He called out, "You up there?" He started climbing. The smell of rust and seawater filled his nose. As he ascended, the red light bled down the stairwell, painting the steps. He could hear the motor humming somewhere above him. "Aaron," he called again. Then, halfway up, his boot hit something metallic. He crouched, aiming the flashlight, and froze. A camera, old and corroded, lay against the wall. The kind used in the 1970s, with a cracked leather strap still clinging to it. The nameplate read, "Property of Walter Dre." Tom picked it up carefully, flipping open the back. Inside was a roll of undeveloped film. "Jesus!" A sudden clang above made him flinch. A door slamming open, maybe. He climbed faster. Aaron stood in the lantern room, staring at the glass. The red light pulsed rhythmically now, as if syncing to her heartbeat. Outside, the sea glowed under the reflection, each wave a dark smear of crimson. She turned toward the staircase as Tom appeared, panting and wide-eyed. "Are you crazy?" he said. "I saw the beam from the house. What the hell did you do?" "I turned it on," she replied, voice trembling. "It was in his notes. He said when the light turns red, they'd come back. I wanted to see what he meant." Tom stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You didn't think maybe there's a reason they shut this place down?" "I think there's a reason no one wanted to find out what happened here," she snapped. Then he held up the camera. "Found this halfway up. It's Dre's. There's film inside." Aaron blinked. "How, after all this time?" "Cold and dark," Tom said. "Sometimes that's all film needs to last." Before Aaron could respond, the light suddenly flickered, stuttered, and went out. The motor died with a groan. Silence. Then, faintly, from the base of the tower, a voice drifted up through the hollow core. "Keeper, you lit the red again." Both of them froze. Tom's face drained of color. "Tell me you heard that." Aaron nodded slowly, hand tightening around her gun. "We're not alone." They descended together, flashlights trembling against the walls. The air grew colder with every step. When they reached the bottom, the door that had been open now stood closed, latched from the outside. Tom tried the handle. Locked. Aaron aimed the light at the hinges. "Then we're trapped." A scraping noise echoed from behind the door, like someone dragging metal over stone. Tom whispered, "Who's out there?" No answer. The scraping stopped. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Aaron raised her gun toward the door, heart pounding. "If someone's out there, identify yourself." Another knock, louder. Then a voice, a woman's this time. Soft, trembling, almost childlike. He shouldn't have turned the light red. Aaron's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" she demanded. But the voice was already fading, swallowed by the wind. Tom stepped back, muttering, "We need to get out of here. Now." Aaron turned her flashlight toward the far wall, and froze. There, just above the stone floor, someone had written in dark, dried streaks of something she didn't want to identify. "The red light wakes them." The words seemed fresh. It took them nearly 20 minutes to pry open the door with a rusted pipe. When they finally forced it open, cold air rushed in, and Aaron nearly stumbled outside. The red glow had vanished. The lighthouse was dark again. Tom bent over, catching his breath. "Whatever that was, it's not over." Aaron looked out toward the water. The tide had receded, revealing jagged rocks glistening under the moonlight. And then she saw it, something caught on one of the rocks. Human. She ran toward the cliff, ignoring Tom's shouts behind her. As she neared the edge, her flashlight beam swept over the object, and her breath hitched. A hand, bone-white and waterlogged, protruded from the cracks between the stones. And clutched in its grasp was a rusted key engraved with the words, "Keeper's Quarters." Erin stared at it, the red afterimage of the lighthouse still pulsing behind her eyes. For the first time, she realized that the story of Walter Dre wasn't about a man who vanished. It was about something that had never left. The key glinted faintly under the flashlight's beam, crusted with salt and time. Erin turned it over in her gloved hand, her pulse still thrumming from what they just heard inside the lighthouse. The engraving, Keeper's Quarters, was worn but unmistakable. It was real. Tom hovered a few steps behind her, still shaken. "You sure you want to pick up anything that comes out of that ocean?" Erin pocketed the key, ignoring him. "We need to know what it opens." "Yeah, but maybe not tonight. We just heard, whatever that was, knocking at the damn door." "Exactly," she said, eyes on the cliffs where the waves hissed. "Someone, or something, doesn't want us to see what's inside those quarters." The keeper's quarters were attached to the base of the lighthouse by a short, crumbling walkway, partially buried under decades of wind-blown debris. The small building hunched low against the rocks like it was trying to hide. Its windows were shuttered, the paint peeled to bone. They approached slowly, flashlights cutting through the mist. Tom muttered, "If this is where Dre lived, it's smaller than I expected." "Most of them were," Erin replied. "The Coast Guard built these as barracks. The lighthouse keepers were supposed to stay here, alone, for months at a time." "Alone," Tom repeated, his voice thin. "Right." When they reached the door, Erin tried the knob. She slipped the key into the old iron keyhole. It fit perfectly. With a heavy click, the door gave way. A rush of stale, cold air swept over them, carrying the smell of mold and salt-soaked wood. Erin shone her light inside. The quarters were a single narrow room with a low ceiling, the walls lined with warped planks and rusting nails. An iron bed frame sat in the corner, its mattress long rotted away. Beside it, a small desk still held a glass oil lamp, a cracked mug, and what looked like a stack of notebooks, their pages swollen from damp. Erin stepped inside. The floor creaked under her boots. "Jesus," Tom murmured, panning his flashlight over the walls. They were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, pinned up in chaotic clusters. Black and white prints, faded Polaroids, old negatives nailed directly into the wood. Each photo showed faces. Dozens of people. Men, women, children. Some smiling. Some blurred. Some half torn away. Erin felt her stomach twist. "He kept them here." "The missing people?" Tom asked quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe these are just the ones he watched." She moved closer to the wall. Many of the photos had names written beneath them in that same tight handwriting she'd seen in the ledger. H. Dawson, 1972. C. Rains, 1974. Mercer, 1975. But others were labeled with only numbers. No names, just sequences like number 14, number 15, number 16. And one photo, larger than the rest, hung at the center. It showed a young woman standing at the base of the lighthouse, smiling shyly at the camera. Her hair whipped in the wind, and her hand rested on the railing. Beneath it, the caption read, "Clara Wynne, last day on island." Tom whispered, "That's the woman from the Coast Guard report. She went missing a week before Dre vanished." Erin nodded. "I think she was the last." They turned toward the desk. The notebooks were brittle, the pages stained with water damage. Erin flipped one open carefully. It wasn't a ledger this time, it was a journal. October 11th, 1975. "The sea's been restless for days. They're whispering again at night. I hear them below the cliffs, calling my name through the cracks. I told Clara to stay inside, but she insists she saw someone walking the shore last evening. If they're back, I have to finish the work. October 16th. The red light is ready. It will show what the eyes can't, what the camera won't. The light reveals their shapes in the fog, but only for a moment. I must keep it turning. October 19th. They're coming up from the water tonight. I'll keep the light burning until it stops them, or takes me too." Erin closed the notebook slowly. Tom exhaled shakily. He lost it. He really lost it. Or, Erin said, he saw something no one else wanted to believe. She crouched by the bed frame and noticed something unusual beneath it. A small wooden trapdoor, half hidden under the boards. rusted hinges, a latch secured with a corroded padlock. She aimed the light at it. "Help me with this." Tom hesitated. "You sure? Could be a cellar or where the bodies went," she finished flatly. He didn't argue. Together they pried the lock loose with a screwdriver from Tom's pack. The metal cracked open with a sharp pop, echoing through the small room. Aaron gripped the handle and lifted. The hatch opened on a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The smell that rose up was a mix of brine, oil, and something metallic. "Smells like seawater," Tom said. "And rust. Let's see where it goes." They descended carefully, flashlights scanning slick stone walls. The steps led into a low chamber carved directly into the rock beneath the lighthouse. It was small, barely 10 feet across, and lined with wooden crates and shelves stacked with strange objects: lanterns, spare lenses, ropes, broken compasses. And on one table sat something that made Aaron's chest tighten: a projector. Beside it, a metal canister labeled "Red Beacon 1975. Tom whispered. He was filming something down here. Aaron knelt beside the projector, brushing off the dust. The reel was still loaded, the film brittle but intact. She turned to Tom. "We need to see what's on this." "Back at the station?" She shook her head. "No time. We have power at the guest house. I want to know what Dre saw before we leave this island." Tom swallowed hard. "Fine. But if that light turns red again, I'll turn it off myself." They returned to the guest house under a bruised sky, the projector and canister wrapped in an old coat. The sea had gone eerily still, and the island seemed to hum with tension. Inside, they cleared space on the dining table and connected the projector to a portable generator Tom had brought for his recording equipment. Aaron loaded the film carefully, fingers trembling. "Ready?" she asked. Tom nodded uneasily. She flipped the switch. The projector whirred to life, light spilling across the far wall. The image flickered, grainy black and white, washed in static, but gradually it sharpened. They saw the lighthouse, standing tall under a stormy sky. The date burned into the bottom corner, October 19th, 1975. Then the camera panned downward, to Walter Dre himself. He was standing on the cliffs, coat whipping in the wind, face gaunt and wild-eyed. His voice came through faintly, warped with age but still distinct. "To anyone who finds this, don't light the red. The red calls them. It doesn't stop them." Aaron and Tom exchanged a glance. The film cut to the lantern room. Dre moved frantically, adjusting knobs, writing something on the glass in chalk. The camera shook violently, then steadied on the lens as it began to glow. At first, it was just light, but as the beam turned red, the image changed. Shapes appeared in the fog beyond the glass, shadowy outlines rising from the water, stretching upward. Dozens of them. Faces blurred, bodies shifting as if underwater. Tom whispered, "Oh my God." The shapes pressed closer to the lighthouse. Dre shouted something, but the sound warped into static. The frame lurched, tilted, and then darkness. When the image returned, the camera was on the ground. The lens pointed at the floorboards. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then a figure stepped into view. A woman. Hair plastered to her face, eyes open but unfocused, seawater dripping from her clothes. She bent down toward the camera, lips moving. Aaron leaned forward, squinting. "Can you make it out?" Tom adjusted the focus. The woman's voice came through, faint and wet-sounding. He turned the light red. Then the film ended, snapping violently as it came loose from the reel. The projector whined, the bulb flickering out. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Tom said, "That was Clara Wynn. The woman in the photo. That was her." Aaron nodded slowly, staring at the empty wall where the image had been. "She wasn't gone. Not the way we thought." "Then what was she?" Tom asked. Aaron stood, her face pale in the dim light. "I think Walter Dre was trying to keep something from crossing back over. The red light wasn't a warning. It was a barrier." Tom blinked. "And when you lit it again?" She didn't finish his sentence. She didn't have to. Outside, a low roll of thunder echoed across the water, except the sky was clear. Aaron turned toward the window, every nerve in her body alive. Far in the distance, out near the cliffs where the lighthouse stood, a single red flash pulsed faintly against the night. The beam was turning again. The red flash came again, faint but rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat against the horizon. Erin stood frozen at the window of the guest house, watching the light sweep slowly across the black water. It was weaker than before, distorted somehow, as if shining through fog that wasn't really there. Tom killed the generator, plunging the room into half-darkness. Tell me you didn't just see that. Erin didn't turn. It's impossible. I shut the motor off myself. Yeah, well, maybe the island didn't get the memo. Erin tore her eyes away from the window. The air inside the guest house felt heavier now, wet, like the walls themselves were breathing. The projector still sat on the table, the reel of film dangling loose. She rewound it carefully, then slipped it into an evidence bag. We need to find the rest of his notes, she said. The ledger in the lighthouse wasn't the only one. There has to be another. Something he kept hidden. Tom rubbed his eyes. You think he wrote down how to stop this? I think he wrote down what he saw, and maybe why it wouldn't stay buried. The next morning, they returned to the lighthouse. The sea was gray, the air thick with mist that clung to their clothes. The cliffs below still bore the scar of the storm that had unearthed the skeleton days ago. When they reached the tower, the door swung open with a faint groan, hinges slick with dew. The air inside smelled of iron and seaweed. Erin shone her flashlight up the spiral stairs. If there's another ledger, it'll be somewhere Dre thought no one would find it. Then we're in the right place, Tom muttered. They climbed in silence, their boots echoing against the metal steps. The lantern room above was still dark, no sign of the red light. But when they reached the mid-level landing, Erin noticed something she hadn't before. The wall behind an old tool cabinet was slightly warped, pushed out, like a panel had been pried open and forced shut again. She ran her gloved hand along the seam and felt a gap. Help me move this. Together, they dragged the cabinet aside. Behind it was a false wall made of thin wooden boards. Erin wedged her crowbar into the crack and pried. The boards splintered with a wet snap. Behind them was a small cavity, no bigger than a storage locker. Inside was a stack of old journals, wrapped in oilskin and tied with twine. The smell hit them immediately, salt, mold, and decay. Tom exhaled softly. Bingo! Erin pulled the journals out and set them on the floor. The covers were soaked, but the ink inside had survived in places. She flipped one open carefully. The first page was dated June 3, 1974. They said the missing men drowned near the inlet. I saw the water that night. It was calm as glass. I know the tide didn't take them. Something else did. She turned another page. July 22nd, the light flickered again last night. When it turned red, I saw their faces outside the window. I counted 7, maybe 8. I told myself they were just reflections, but one of them smiled at me. They were waiting to be remembered. Another entry later. August 9th. The voices are clearer now. They ask me to write. They say I can keep them alive if I don't stop recording their names. Erin frowned. He wasn't documenting navigation logs. He was chronicling them, like he thought writing them down would keep them from disappearing. Tom knelt beside her, flipping through another notebook. This one's almost all names. Look, every missing person from the reports is in here. He pointed to a list written in tight cursive, the ink smeared but legible. Henry Dawson, Charles Rains, Anna Mercer, Clara Wynne. At the bottom of the page was a final name, written darker than the rest. Erin Calloway. Tom's hand went still. Wait, what the hell is that? Erin stared at it, her mind blanking for a moment. It must be a coincidence. Another Erin. Tom shook his head. This entry's dated October 19, 1975, the same night he vanished. You weren't even born yet. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Then how? A sound interrupted her, a faint drip, drip, drip echoing from above. They froze. Tell me that's condensation, Tom whispered. Erin looked up. The sound was coming from the lantern room. They climbed the remaining stairs slowly, the air growing colder with each step. When they reached the top, The glass chamber was filled with fog, thick enough to hide the far side of the room. The lantern itself stood motionless, its great lens fogged with condensation. Then Aaron noticed the source of the dripping. A dark puddle spread across the floor beneath the lamp. Water. And in the center of that puddle, something floated, thin, fragile, like paper. She crouched, reaching for it. It was a torn page from one of Dre's ledgers, the ink still legible despite being soaked through. The drowned want witnesses. The light keeps their names above water. If the red fades, so do they. Aaron's stomach twisted. The light isn't calling them, it's keeping them contained. Tom blinked. You're saying he built the beacon to hold them here? Like a prison? She nodded. That's why he kept writing. The ledger wasn't just for him. It was their anchor. Tom's face went pale. And when he disappeared, the prison broke. A loud crack echoed from somewhere below, wood splintering, the sound of something shifting deep within the lighthouse's foundation. Tom's flashlight wavered. Tell me that was the wind. Come on. Aaron turned toward the stairs. We need to see if the structure's stable. But as they descended, the air changed. It thickened, turning humid and sour. A faint humming rose through the stairwell, vibrating in their bones. When they reached the first floor, the door to the outside was open again. Wide this time, swinging back and forth in the wind. Seawater had pooled across the floor, rippling with each gust. Tom stepped forward, then stopped dead. Footprints. Wet, bare, leading from the doorway across the floor toward the far wall. Aaron followed them with her flashlight until they vanished into a corner where the stone had darkened with moisture. She crouched to inspect them, and saw that the water there wasn't from the storm. It was seeping through the wall. What in God's name? Tom whispered. Aaron touched the stone. It was soft, almost pulsing. When she pulled her hand back, it was wet with salt water. Then a whisper brushed past her ear. You shouldn't have written the name. She spun around, gun raised. Nothing there. Aaron. Tom's voice trembled. Who are you talking to? She swallowed hard. We're leaving. Now. They backed toward the door, but before they could step out, the red light above them flickered once, then again. A deep rumble shook the ground. The puddle on the floor rippled violently. From the cracks in the stone, bubbles rose, followed by a faint, briny smell of decay. Tom grabbed her arm. Move! They stumbled out into the open air as the rumbling grew louder. The lighthouse behind them shuddered, the beam flashing red again, brighter this time, casting long streaks across the rocks. And in that light, just for a second, they saw them. Figures standing at the edge of the cliffs. Dozens of them, their clothes soaked, faces pale and glistening. Watching. Tom gasped. Those are the people in the photos. Aaron's throat locked. The drowned. The figures didn't move, didn't breathe. They simply stared, the red light painting their hollow eyes. Then, as the beam turned away, they began to sink, slowly, soundlessly, back into the sea. When the light rotated again, the cliffs were empty. They didn't speak on the walk back to the guest house. The island was silent, the fog so dense it seemed alive. Inside, Tom poured whiskey into 2 cracked mugs. His hand shook. I've covered war zones, murder scenes, disaster sites. Nothing has ever looked at me like that. Erin stared into her drink, her mind spinning. They wanted me to see that ledger. Tom frowned. You mean Dre's ghostly book club down there? She shook her head slowly. No. The names. They're the key. Dre thought writing them down was keeping them here, but what if it's the opposite? What if naming them pulls them back? He set his mug down carefully. And your name's in there now. Erin didn't reply. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the page she'd found under the lamp. The ink was running now, the letters dissolving into the paper. If the red fades, so do they. But beneath it, something new was appearing, letters bleeding through the paper from the other side. Tom leaned closer. What's that say? Erin flipped it over. In fresh, wet ink, a single line had appeared. The ledger's not finished, Erin. She stared at it, the words trembling in her hand. Then, outside, the red light flashed one more time, so bright it bled through the curtains and painted the room in crimson. When it faded, the sea was silent again. But the sound of dripping had returned. This time, it was coming from inside the house. The ocean was unnervingly calm that night, a deceptive stillness that made Erin's nerves hum like live wire. The waves rolled in with a slow, deliberate rhythm, whispering against the rocks below as though the sea itself was catching its breath before the next scream. She stood at the base of the lighthouse, the beam cutting through the fog in rhythmic sweeps, each rotation revealing the black, endless expanse around her. The gray point light was alive again, its red beacon pulsing across the water, though she hadn't yet discovered who turned it on. Or what had. She had spent the afternoon drying out the recovered pages from the drowned ledger. They now sat across the table in the keeper's quarters, fragile and wrinkled, but legible. Her flashlight glowed dimly over the ink, names, dates, initials, and a series of numbers she still hadn't decoded. But what chilled her wasn't the writing itself. It was the last entry. March 3rd, 1975, the sea takes her again tonight. May she stay quiet this time. W.D. There had to be Rebecca, the woman from the waterlogged photograph, the one whose voice she swore she heard beneath the waves 2 nights ago. Erin's hands shook as she traced the words, feeling the strange pull of that entry, the way it seemed less like a journal note and more like a warning. And then came the smell. A faint trace of kerosene. She turned. The lantern she'd left unlit by the door was flickering to life, the wick catching flame by itself. Erin's breath froze. She moved closer, slowly. Who's there? No answer. Only the sound of rain beginning to fall again outside, tapping on the glass like fingertips. The lantern hissed. The flame flared. And then a man's voice, low, hoarse, carried on the sea wind, echoed from the spiral staircase leading up to the lantern room. It's not yours to light. She turned sharply toward the sound, flashlight trembling in her grip. Show yourself. No response, but she could hear footsteps, slow, heavy, and deliberate, descending the metal stairs. Each clang reverberated through the walls. Erin backed up toward the kitchen counter, one hand on the holster at her belt. Who's there? This is Detective Erin Calloway with the York County Sheriff's Office. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, faintly, the creak of a door hinge from above. She took the stairs 2 at a time, flashlight beam bouncing against the narrow walls until she reached the small landing outside the lantern room. The smell of sea salt and rust was stronger here, mixed with something else, old oil and something metallic. The door was open just enough for her to see the flicker of the beacon inside. And then she saw him. A man, standing beside the control panel. Tall, thin, wearing a salt-stained coat and dark trousers. His hair, white and stringy, clung to his scalp. His skin looked like driftwood, pale, sun-bleached, and leathery. He turned slowly toward her, and she saw his eyes, gray, cold, unblinking. "Who are you?" she asked. He smiled faintly, his lips cracking. "I could ask you the same." "Sir, this lighthouse is closed to the public. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from that light." His smile widened. "Closed to the public?" He let out a raspy chuckle. "It's never closed. It only rests. The sea won't let it sleep for long." Erin's pulse pounded. "Are you," she hesitated, "Walter Dre?" The man's head tilted slightly, the faintest spark of amusement in his eyes. "Dre," he repeated as if tasting the name. "People keep saying that. Keeper, warden, murderer. Whatever they called me, I did what had to be done." Erin stepped closer. "You've been missing for 24 years. He looked at her like she was a child reciting from a textbook. "Missing?" "Kept." He pointed one bony finger toward the sea outside. "It keeps what it loves." "Walter, I need you to come with me," Erin said, voice steadying. "There are questions you need to answer." His smile faltered for the first time. "Questions?" he whispered. "Always questions. You people never learn to listen." Before she could react, the beacon's rotation slowed, then stopped. The light flickered, dimmed, and the sound of the ocean outside grew louder, more violent. He took a step forward. "You've woken it up again, detective. The sea remembers what you take from it." And then, a roar from below. The lighthouse trembled. Erin spun around, gripping the railing as the floor shook beneath her. A thunderous crack split through the walls, the sound of rock fracturing, water pounding against the base of the structure. When she turned back, he was gone. Only the faint sound of boots clanging down the spiral stairs remained. She followed, heart hammering, until she reached the main level again. The lantern she'd seen light itself was extinguished, the flames snuffed out. The front door swung open, letting in the howling wind and rain. She stepped outside, scanning the shoreline with her flashlight, the beam cutting through sheets of mist. There, near the cliff's edge, she saw him again. Standing perfectly still, coat whipping around him, staring out toward the sea. Erin shouted over the wind, "Walter, stop!" He didn't move. Then, slowly, he raised one arm and pointed toward the water, where something pale was floating in the surf. Erin moved closer, her shoes slipping on wet rock. She aimed her light at the waves and froze. It was a body, or what was left of one. The tide had carried it against the rocks, flesh mottled and waterlogged, eyes open to the rain. A man, middle-aged, wearing a gray sheriff's jacket. Erin's throat closed. Sheriff Halpern, her commanding officer, the man who had gone missing on the mainland 2 days ago after promising to send reinforcements. She stumbled backward. "Oh God!" The old man turned to her, expression calm, almost sad. He came asking questions too. Erin raised her gun, voice breaking. "What did you do to him?" "I didn't kill him," Walter said softly. "The sea did. The same sea that took Rebecca. The same sea that keeps them all." The wind surged, tearing at her coat, drowning out her next words. He stepped closer, and for the first time she noticed his hands, cracked, raw, with skin that looked waterlogged. "Walter," she said, barely a whisper, "how are you still alive?" His eyes glistened with something unreadable, pain, or maybe devotion. "I told you," he murmured. "I was kept." Then he turned, walking straight toward the edge of the cliff. "Wait!" Erin shouted. She ran after him, grabbing his sleeve just as he reached the brink, but there was no resistance. His coat sleeve came away in her hand, and he fell, or vanished, into the mist below. No splash, no scream, only the relentless crash of the waves. She collapsed to her knees, breath ragged, the torn sleeve soaked in her grip. When she looked down, she saw something inside the fabric, a small rusted key. She turned it over. On the side, barely legible beneath the corrosion, was a number, 7. Hours later, she sat by the flickering light of her flashlight inside the keeper's quarters, the key resting beside her. The storm outside was dying, the rain now a steady whisper. She opened the ledger again, flipping to the final page. Beneath the last written entry, faint pencil marks traced another note she hadn't noticed before. Key 7, beneath the stairs. For when she wakes. Erin turned toward the staircase. The shadows pooled beneath the steps like an open mouth. She took a deep breath, grabbed her flashlight, and crouched down. The beam caught something metallic, a small trapdoor, half hidden by planks. Her heart pounded. She inserted the key, turned it, and heard a soft click. The hatch opened with a sigh. Cold air rushed out, thick, damp, and foul. She lowered her light. A narrow tunnel stretched below, carved into the rock, descending toward the sea. And faintly, echoing from the dark, she heard it. A voice. A woman's. Whispering her name. The tunnel smelled of salt and rot. Erin could taste the brine in her throat with every breath she took, and the sound of dripping water echoed endlessly ahead. Plip, 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 like a clock counting down. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and stepped down the slick, narrow stairs beneath the lighthouse. The key still trembled in her pocket, warm from her hand as though it carried its own pulse. The wooden hatch had closed above her with a dull thud, and now there was no turning back. The air grew colder the deeper she went. Her light danced across walls carved crudely from the bedrock, streaked with mineral deposits and old scratches. Someone had built this tunnel long before the lighthouse had power, a secret passage that led straight into the island's bones. Her boots splashed into shallow pools. The whisper came again. "Erin." A woman's voice, faint but unmistakable. She stopped, heart hammering. "Rebecca," she said quietly. "Is that you?" No reply, just the sound of the sea pressing against the walls, like something massive and alive shifting just beyond the stone. She moved forward. The tunnel narrowed, then opened suddenly into a wider chamber, a hollowed-out cavern dimly lit by her trembling beam. In the center stood a wooden table covered in wax drippings and glass jars, their contents clouded by murky liquid. A rusted lantern sat overturned nearby. Aaron's stomach twisted. Inside the jars were pieces of bone, small, delicate, and tagged with initials. Some were children's bones. Her light caught movement, a ripple of water at the far end of the chamber. There, a small pool connected directly to the sea through a gap in the rocks. Waves rolled in and out through it, breathing in time with the tide. She moved closer and saw something glint beneath the surface. Metal hinges, a lock, and beneath it, a lid. A coffin. She crouched at the edge, shining her light directly into the water. The shape was unmistakable, a rectangular box anchored in place by chains, covered in algae and salt. There was writing on the top, barely visible, R.D. Rebecca Dre. Her voice caught in her throat. "Oh my God!" The whisper came again, louder now, curling through the air around her. "He said he'd keep me safe." Aaron spun around, but the tunnel behind her was empty. Her light trembled as the whisper grew, not angry, but mournful. "He said he'd hide me, until the tide forgot." She turned back toward the coffin. The water began to move, swirling faster as if something beneath was stirring. Bubbles rose to the surface, and the metal chains groaned. "Rebecca?" Aaron's voice shook. "Are you still?" The coffin lid shifted. She stumbled backward, her flashlight beam jerking wildly. The lid scraped open an inch, releasing a rush of air and the stench of decay. A pale hand floated upward. Aaron screamed, stumbling into the wall, her light scattering across the stone. The hand drifted toward the surface, fingers bloated and white, the nails long and gray. Then, another sound. Footsteps. Someone was coming down the tunnel. Aaron drew her gun, pointing it toward the dark entrance. "Who's there?" A voice answered, hoarse, familiar. "You shouldn't be here, detective." Walter Dre emerged from the darkness, his eyes gleaming in the flashlight's beam. He was drenched, his coat dripping seawater, his expression unreadable. "Stay back," Aaron warned. "Don't take another step." He raised his hands slightly. "You found her, didn't you?" "I found what's left of her," she snapped. "What the hell did you do?" He looked at the coffin, face softening into something almost tender. "She drowned herself. I only kept her close so she wouldn't be alone." "That's not true," Aaron said, her voice trembling. "You killed her. And you killed the others too." Walter shook his head slowly. "No. I tried to save them. The ledger says otherwise." At that he flinched, just barely. "The ledger tells you what I did, not why." "Then tell me." He stepped closer, and she didn't lower her gun. "You won't believe me," he said quietly. "No one ever does. The sea isn't just water, detective. It's hungry. It listens. It remembers. It gives what it takes, but never for free." "That's not an explanation," Aaron said. "Rebecca heard it first," he continued, eyes distant. "She said the waves spoke to her. Said the sea had voices. I thought she'd gone mad. Then one night she walked out there during a storm. I followed, and she was gone." He paused, voice breaking. "But when the tide went out, she came back. Not breathing, not alive, but not gone either. I buried her, but the sea kept bringing her back. Every time." Aaron's skin prickled. "You're saying she wanted me to keep her," he interrupted. "So I built this place. For her. And for the others the sea took. They called me a murderer. But I was a keeper. I kept them from being forgotten." The sound of the waves deepened, a low, thrumming vibration that shook the floor beneath them. The coffin rocked, and the hand slipped beneath the surface again. Aaron's grip on the gun faltered. "Walter, whatever you think you did, you need to let it go. You're sick. You need help." He smiled faintly. "Help won't save you now." "What?" He looked toward the tunnel entrance. "It's awake. The ground trembled violently. Water gushed through the cracks, spraying into the chamber. The tide was surging in, filling the space fast. Erin holstered her gun and grabbed the lantern, backing toward the stairs. "We have to go." Walter didn't move. He stared at the coffin, voice low. "She's not done yet." "Walter." He turned to her, eyes shining in the dim light. "Tell the world what you found, detective. Tell them the truth, that I wasn't the monster they made me." Then he stepped into the rising water, wading toward the coffin. "Stop!" Erin shouted. He placed his hand on the lid, and it opened fully. A torrent of bubbles burst from inside, and a shape rose, not just the body, but something attached to it. Long strands of hair fanned out like seaweed, and beneath them, a pale face surfaced, eyes open, lips blue, mouth moving soundlessly. "Rebecca." Walter fell to his knees in the water, sobbing. "I kept you safe," he whispered. "I kept you safe." The corpse's head tilted toward him, and Erin saw its hand rise, fingers curling around his wrist. "Walter!" But he didn't resist. The water surged upward, swallowing them both as the chamber filled. Erin turned and ran. The tunnel shook, rocks collapsing around her as seawater flooded in. She scrambled up the stairs, chest burning, her flashlight slipping from her hand and plunging into the dark below. She climbed in near blackness, following the faint outline of the hatch above. The sound of the waves grew deafening. She reached the hatch, pushed, it wouldn't move. Swollen wood, locked from the outside. "No, no, no!" She slammed her shoulder against it, coughing as seawater lapped at her boots. Finally, it gave way, bursting open with a crash that threw her onto the floor of the keeper's quarters. She dragged herself out, gasping, soaked and shaking. The storm outside had returned, sheets of rain hammering against the lighthouse. She crawled to the window. The sea below glowed faintly red, reflecting the pulsing beacon above. For a moment, she thought she saw two figures standing on the rocks, Walter and Rebecca, before the next flash of lightning erased them. The sound of the waves softened. The lighthouse creaked. And then silence. Hours later, dawn came gray and heavy. The storm had passed. Erin sat wrapped in a blanket near the base of the lighthouse, watching the sea. The rescue boat from the mainland was still a mile out, a faint dot against the horizon. She clutched the ledger in her hands, the last piece of proof she had. But the final pages were gone, dissolved by seawater. The key, too, lost somewhere in the flooded tunnel below. She had tried to tell herself she'd imagined the whispers, the hand, the body that moved, but the rational part of her was growing smaller by the hour. The sea was calm now, gentle. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her. Waiting. She looked up at the lantern room one last time. The red beacon was dark now. And yet, as the boat drew closer, she saw movement at the top of the stairs, a shadow crossing the glass. Her breath caught. For just an instant she saw him. Walter Dre. Standing tall beside the lens, his hand on the railing, watching her leave. The sea breeze carried a faint whisper across the water. The keeper never leaves. By the time Erin reached the mainland, dawn had burned into a colorless haze, the kind of pale, exhausted light that made everything feel both alive and hollow. The rescue team hadn't believed half of what she said on the boat. They exchanged uneasy looks, jotting down details about the flooded tunnel, the missing sheriff, the discovery of remains. When she mentioned Walter Dre, one of the older men aboard had gone rigid. "Dre's dead," he muttered. "Been dead for decades." No one spoke much after that. Now, hours later, Erin sat inside the York County Police Station, wrapped in a dry uniform someone had found for her. Her wet clothes hung near the radiator, and the ledger, the waterlogged, half-destroyed ledger, sat on the desk before her. The room smelled of coffee and mildew. The clock ticked above the bulletin board, where missing person flyers stared back at her, 7 faces in total, each one with "presumed deceased" stamped beneath. All 7 connected to Gray Point Island. All 7 names she'd seen in Walter's ledger. She rubbed her temples, exhausted. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rebecca's pale hand reaching through the water, and Walter's face disappearing beneath the rising tide. Detective Heller, her supervisor now that Sheriff Halpern was gone, stepped into the room. "You look like hell, Calloway." "I feel worse," she muttered. He leaned against the doorframe. "Coast Guard says they'll be dredging near the island today. If there's any truth to what you said, they'll find that tunnel." "They won't," Aaron said quietly. Heller frowned. "Why not?" She looked up at him, her voice flat. "Because it's gone. Flooded. Buried. The sea took it back." He sighed. "You need rest, not riddles. The coroner's team will go over the body you brought in." Her head snapped up. "Body?" "The one recovered near the rocks, about a mile from the lighthouse. Middle-aged male, gray uniform." Her stomach turned. "Halpern." Heller hesitated. "That's the thing. It looks like Halpern. Same build. Same face. But the body's too far gone for 2 days in water. The state coroner says it's been submerged for years." Aaron stared at him. "That's not possible." Heller crossed his arms. "You're right. It's not. But they ran his fingerprints through the database. Want to know what came back?" Her silence was answer enough. Heller dropped a report onto the desk. "Walter Dre." Aaron felt the air leave her lungs. He tapped the page. "Dead since 1975, according to the original case file. But this body, it's him. Or someone who sure as hell looks like him." Aaron's mouth went dry. "You think I imagined what I saw out there?" Heller sighed. "I think you went through a storm, a flood, and saw a lot of death. I think that can make anyone see ghosts." Aaron looked down at the ledger, its pages wrinkled and dark. "I didn't imagine the tunnel." "Maybe not. But without proof, this case goes nowhere." He pushed away from the wall. "Go home, Calloway. Get some sleep. We'll talk when you're thinking straight." He left her alone with the ticking clock and the whisper of the sea through the open window. That night, Aaron couldn't sleep. She sat by her window in her small coastal apartment, watching the fog roll in off the bay. Her mind played and replayed the sound of Walter's voice, that soft, mournful tone that had lingered in her ears even as she fled the island. She reached for the ledger again, flipping through the ruined pages. Most of the ink had bled away, but the final entry remained. Key 7, beneath the stairs. For when she wakes. But now, below that line, something new. She blinked, leaning closer. The writing was faint, as if recently added, thin lines of black cutting through the old stains. "The light never dies, Aaron. It waits." Her blood ran cold. She traced the words with her fingertips, then looked toward the lighthouse across the bay. It stood faintly visible through the mist, a dark silhouette against the moonlight. And there was the light, flickering. Weak, but undeniably real. Her phone rang, jolting her. She snatched it up. "Detective Calloway?" A voice said, an older man, raspy, with the clipped tone of a Coast Guard officer. "You'd better come down to the docks. We found something you'll want to see." She arrived 20 minutes later. The docks were slick with fog, and the men from the Coast Guard moved around with flashlights and clipboards. One of them waved her over to a tarp-covered shape lying on the pier. The officer pulled back the cover. Beneath it lay a wooden box, rotted, seaweed clinging to the edges. A coffin. "This washed up near the mainland about an hour ago," he said. "Currents must have carried it from Gray Point." "It's empty." Aaron's pulse quickened. "You're sure?" He nodded. "We checked twice. But here's the strange part." He gestured to the lid. Carved into the wood, still visible despite the salt damage, were the letters RD. Rebecca Dre. Aaron crouched beside it, fingertips brushing the engraving. The wood was damp but cold, as though it had been submerged for years, not hours. "Where was it found?" she asked. "Near the cove, about 2 miles from here." Aaron stood, scanning the horizon. The lighthouse was still visible in the distance. The faint light continued to blink. Once every 15 seconds. The same rhythm as before. She turned to the officer. "Can I borrow your boat?" The island was eerily quiet when she arrived. The storm had stripped the shoreline bare. No boats, no debris, only the hiss of the sea against the rocks. She climbed the path toward the lighthouse, her flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Every step echoed. When she reached the door, she found it slightly open. She pushed it gently and stepped inside. The air was heavy with the scent of damp and oil. The furniture had shifted, washed toward the walls by the flooding. Water stains reached halfway up the stairs. But everything was intact. The ledger, the lantern, even the empty chair by the desk, as though nothing had changed. And from above, faintly, the hum of machinery. The beacon was running. She climbed the spiral staircase, heart pounding with each step. The air grew warmer as she neared the top. When she reached the lantern room, the red light bathed everything in a dim, pulsing glow. The machinery whirred softly, impossibly functional despite being long dead. And then she saw the window. Written across the condensation in a shaking hand. The sea keeps what it loves. Her throat tightened. She turned slowly toward the beacon's core and froze. Inside the glass of the rotating lens, distorted by its curve, a figure stood motionless. A man. Tall, thin, coat soaked through. Walter Dre. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring out at the horizon, where the fog met the sea. Aaron stepped forward cautiously. Walter. His reflection turned. And smiled. The red light pulsed again. Brighter this time, and in the next instant he was gone. The glass was empty. The machinery stopped. And the beacon died. She stumbled back, breathing hard, fumbling for the flashlight. The light beam flickered across the walls, and caught something carved into the metal of the railing. Deep, deliberate letters scratched by hand. The keeper never leaves. Her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, shaking. Outside, thunder rumbled, not from the sky, but from the water. The sea was roaring again, surging against the cliffs as if the island itself were exhaling. She stumbled down the stairs, out the door, and onto the rocks. The lighthouse stood above her, looming against the sky. The sea glowed faintly red below, reflecting the last pulse of light that had come from its heart. She turned toward the horizon. The fog parted for just a moment. There, in the distance, another light. A second beacon. Flashing the same rhythm. It was coming from the mainland. From the coast. From the direction of her apartment. 3 days later, the investigation officially closed. The report listed Sheriff Halpern as presumed dead. Gray Point Island was declared unsafe and permanently sealed off. The ledger disappeared from evidence storage. Erin tried to move on. She transferred to a smaller department inland, far from the sea. But she never stopped checking the news. Every few weeks, she'd read about strange lights off the Maine coast, fishermen claiming to see figures near the cliffs, or boats that went silent near the waterline. And every night as she lay in bed, she'd hear it. The faint, rhythmic sound of a foghorn. Once every 15 seconds. Sometimes, when she couldn't sleep, she'd walk to her window. And there, across the distance, she'd see it. A single red light, blinking steadily in the mist. She knew what it meant. The sea remembers. The keeper never leaves. And the light never dies.